Let me paint you a picture. Imagine for a second that one of the world's most vital arteries for global trade just gets clamped shut. Well, in April of 2026, that's pretty much exactly what happened in the Strait of Hormuz. And the shockwaves, oh, they touch just about every corner of the globe. So what's the first cost? The most immediate one. It's human. Just like that, 20,000 mariners, 20,000 people, found themselves completely stranded inside the Persian Gulf. Their ships were at a dead stop, caught right in the middle of a geopolitical nightmare. And they weren't the only ones stuck out there. We're talking 2,000 vessels, everything from these massive supertankers to the container ships that carry, well, everything we buy, stuck right there with them. It created this absolutely insane maritime traffic jam. And then came the economic gut punch. Nearly 90% of the oil that normally flows through this critical choke point was blocked. The tap was just turned off. And believe me, the entire world felt that pressure, immediately. All right, let's really get into this. We're going to start with how the strait slammed shut in the first place. Then we'll look at the direct attacks on ships, the economic fallout, and, this is fascinating, the surprising progress that actually happened despite all the chaos. And finally, we'll talk about what it all means for our new global reality. So, how did we even get here? Well, for a very brief moment, there was a glimmer of hope. A ceasefire was in place. But then, on April 18th, the U.S. refused to lift its naval blockade, so Iran reclosed the Strait of Hormuz. And that little window of hope, it just slammed shut. The reaction on the water was instantaneous. I mean, you can just picture the chaos on the bridges of these ships, right? Captains getting these frantic messages, having to turn these enormous vessels around. Within hours, 33 ships that had nothing to do with Iran, were scrambling to get out of there. And this is where things went from a logistical nightmare to a full-blown security crisis. This wasn't just about being stuck anymore. Suddenly, it was about being a target. The escalation was just incredibly fast. On the very same day the strait was closed, bam, 2 ships get attacked. The next day, traffic basically collapses to nothing. And by the 22nd, container ships, the lifeblood of global trade, were being directly fired upon. The message was loud and clear: nobody is safe here. Now this is really interesting. Look at the variety here. You've got an Indian-flagged oil tanker and a Malta-flagged container ship. This tells you the attacks were totally indiscriminate. They were hitting different types of ships from different countries to create the maximum amount of fear and chaos. Of course, the world reacted pretty fast. India formally protested. The U.S. fired back by seizing an Iranian vessel and beefing up its naval presence. And then, and this is a truly wild sign of the times, scammers started popping up, sending messages to desperate shipping companies promising them safe passage if they paid up in crypto. Unbelievable. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. Because a crisis in a place like the Strait of Hormuz, well, it doesn't stay in the Strait of Hormuz. It sends ripples out across the entire global economy, and eventually those ripples reach every single one of us. The numbers here are just staggering. 10 million barrels of oil a day, suddenly just gone from the global market. That is a massive supply shock, and it caused worldwide seaborne crude shipments to plummet by 16%. But here's where things get interesting, where you can see the global chessboard shifting right before your eyes. Saudi Arabia immediately pivoted. They started using their east-west pipeline to send their crude over to the Red Sea, bypassing Hormuz completely. This set off a huge surge in tanker activity at their Yanbu port, basically redrawing the world's energy map in real time. And this right here, this shows you the chain reaction perfectly. See, energy is a huge component in making fertilizer. So with energy prices spiking, the forecast for fertilizer prices shot up by 15 to 20%. This is literally how a naval blockade in the Persian Gulf can threaten to make the food on your dinner table more expensive. And the problems just kept compounding. It wasn't just Hormuz. A completely separate drone strike forced the major port of Salalah in Oman to shut down. So now you have shipping giants like Hapag-Lloyd frantically trying to reroute their entire fleets, which just poured more fuel on an already raging fire. But here's what's so fascinating about this whole story. You'd think with all this chaos, the world would just grind to a halt, right? But it didn't. In the middle of this massive crisis, the maritime industry was quietly making these huge leaps into the future. And this is such a key point. While everyone was dealing with the immediate danger, industry leaders were also tackling these big, long-term problems. At the exact same time ships were under fire, Singapore was announcing plans for autonomous vessels to fight port congestion. It's this incredible display of being able to look beyond the chaos of the now. And the biggest long-term project of them all, green shipping, it just kept right on chugging along. I mean, decarbonizing an entire global industry is a monumental task, and it's pretty remarkable that not even an act of conflict was enough to stop the work on new fuels and technologies. And these weren't just meetings. We're talking tangible breakthroughs. In that same week of chaos, China launched a massive electric container ship. A Japanese company got the green light for a CO2 carrier that uses wind power, and a Brazilian mining giant inked a deal for the world's first ethanol-powered cargo ships. The momentum was just unstoppable. And the progress wasn't just on the tech front, it was about people too. New rules to crack down on these so-called shadow fleets that skirt sanctions got approved. A huge new project was launched to combat sexual misconduct at sea, and there were important talks about making ship recycling safer for the environment. The industry was still pushing to be better, safer, and cleaner. So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? What did this absolutely insane week in April 2026 actually teach us about the world we're living in now? Well, here it is, put as plainly as possible. The idea that we get to deal with just one crisis at a time, that's over. The new reality, the new baseline is having multiple, overlapping disruptions in different parts of the world, all happening at once. And this is exactly what that new baseline looks like. The Hormuz closure didn't happen in a vacuum, right? It happened while a drone strike was shutting down a port in Oman, which then overloaded ports in India, which then put a huge strain on fuel supplies in Singapore. It was a perfect storm, and the International Maritime Organization called it the worst disruption since COVID-19. And that leaves us with a really critical question. This crisis proved that multiple essential choke points can all fail at the same time. It's not a hypothetical anymore. So the real question isn't just for shipping companies, it's for every single one of us. Is the world we've all built, the one we rely on every day, actually ready for that reality?